Hello students, today we start here with our new poem Ode to the West Wind by P.B. Shelley. Ode to the West Wind. Introduction of the poet. P.B. Shelley is one of the romantic poets of the 19th century. Shelley was a revolutionary. He was against customs and conventions of the world. He was little interested in the past. His eyes were fixed intently on the future. To renovate the world, to bring about the golden age, was his constant aim. The most glowing picture of such a society is presented in his Prometheus Unbound. There is vagueness and obscurity in his poem. He is a great poet of revolutionary idealism. Theme of the poem. In this poem, Ode to the West Wind, the poet wants to convey the message that as the stronger, powerful, and fierce west wind drives away rotten and dead leaves from the earth and chariots the seeds to their wintry bed, similarly, all rotten, meaningless, and outdated ideas and conventions must be wiped out from the earth. There must be an establishment of a creedless and casteless society. With the help of this poem, the world should know the flowering of new ideas. Summary of the poem. The speaker invokes the wild west wind of autumn, which scatters the dead leaves and spreads seeds so that they may be nurtured by the spring, and asks the wind, which is the destroyer and preserver, to hear him. The speaker calls the wind the dirge of the dying year and describes how it stirs up violent storms and again implores it to hear him. The poet says that the wind stirs the Mediterranean from a summer dream and cleaves the Atlantic into choppy chasms, making the sapless foliage of the ocean tremble. First stanza. In this stanza, addressing the west wind as a human, the poet describes its activities. It drives the dead leaves away as if they were ghosts fleeing a wizard. The leaves are yellow, black, pale, and red, as if they suffered from an infectious epidemic disease. The west wind carries seeds in its chariot and deposits them in the earth, where they lie until the spring wind awakens them by blowing on a trumpet. On hearing the calls of the trumpet, the seeds come out of their graves. The poet further compares the spring to a shepherd. Just as a shepherd takes his flock of sheep to the fields, similarly the spring drives the seeds out of the buds. In a paradox, the poet addresses the west wind as a destroyer and preserver. Second stanza. In this stanza, the poet describes the great disturbance caused by the west wind when it blows through the sky. The clouds are the leaves of two mighty trees, the ocean and the sky. And the west wind is a stream that sweeps away these leaves. These clouds get scattered over the blue surface of the sky and spread all over it from the extreme boundary of the horizon to the highest point in the sky. They are the messengers of rain and lightning and are the locks of the approaching storm. They look like the hair uplifted from the head of some frenzied Maenad, the female worshipper of Bacchus, that is the god of wine. The poet imagines the whistling sound of the west wind to be the dirge or the funeral song of the dying year. A huge tomb will also be erected over the dead year. The darkness of the night, which is spreading over the earth, will serve as the doom of that tomb. In the end, the poet appeals to the west wind to hear his prayers. Third stanza. In this stanza, Shelley describes the action of the west wind in Mediterranean Sea and on the Atlantic Ocean. The west wind announces to the Mediterranean Sea that summer is over and autumn has arrived. The clear view on a bright summer day of the underwater palaces and towers in Bay's Bay off the coast of Naples near the island made up of volcanic rock is disrupted by the west wind which blows across it. Similarly, the west wind creates deep chasms. It cuts furrows over the smooth surface of the Atlantic and disturbs the quiet of the Mediterranean. The plants growing at the bottom of the sea know its voice and suddenly grow grey with fear. Fourth stanza. The poet wishes that he were a dead leaf like the ones in the first stanza, or a cloud like the ones in the second stanza, or an ocean wave that would ride forward. But he no longer possesses the same energy of the west wind. He identifies himself with the wind but cannot cope with her. He could equally balance only when he was a boy full of vigor and energy. When he was a boy, he could accompany the wandering wind in the heavens and could dream of traveling faster. Well, then he could never have prayed to the west wind as he is doing now in his hour of need. In his boyhood, he too was tameless, swift, and uncontrollable, like the west wind. But time has changed and bowed his spirit. He is in sore need of the strength. He is thus eager to share the impulse of the west wind and appeals it to lift him as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. The last stanza, the poet asks the west wind to turn him into a lyre or a stringed instrument in the same way that the west wind blows through a forest. And if the poet's leaves blow in the wind like those from the forest trees, there will be heard a deep autumnal tone that is both sweet and sad. He implores the west wind to be his spirit and drive his dead thoughts like the dead leaves across the universe in order to prepare the way for new birth in the spring. The poet asks the wind to scatter his words around the world as if they were ashes from a burning fire. He wants to spread his thoughts over the universe through his poetry. He feels that his thoughts may bring a new era if inspired by the energy of the west wind. Thank you.